All right, good morning, folks. Welcome to the last day. You guys have had a good week, I suppose. Lots of good sessions, lots of good data, I hope. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to go through a couple different things here. I'll do some quick introductions. So I'm Bryan Wofford. I'm a Principal Customer Experience PM for Microsoft. And I handle a lot of the MVP program for Microsoft, so our M365 MVPs that you've heard from all week this week. And I also handle a lot of our content for different conferences that we attend. And so this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart around governance of data and governance of Copilot. I put the QR code up here. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, you're welcome to do so. But this is just an easy way to see kind of what's coming next in our world. And one of the things I do in LinkedIn is I'm plugged into all of our engineering teams. So I try to make sure you guys are getting at least the newest, latest, and greatest stuff that's out there. Sponsor slide. So obviously, thanks for all these folks that have been here all week. Hopefully you've visited their booths in the expo hall and seen some of the data from them and kind of give them some love. These conferences can't go on without these platinum sponsors being in the mix. So for agenda, standard stuff, did intro real quick, talked about sponsors. We'll have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. There's a lot of slides in here, and so I'm going to try real hard to get through a lot of this. And admittedly, I don't ever trust the internet when I do demos, so everything is screen grabs and stuff so that we can make sure we get to see everything. But we'll go through a lot of good content in here for you. So the first piece of this is Microsoft 365 Copilot is built on trust. One of the things that Microsoft does different than some of our competitors is that there are actual commitments and there's actual controls in place from Microsoft around data, right? And that's why a lot of companies have their data with us. That's why you have data in our tenants, in the cloud, and those types of things. And we have a lot of tools that are in place for that to help you control and manage that. So because of those commitments and controls, and because of the fact that all that data is in one place, it makes it easier to put governance policies around that. We're going to talk about a lot of those today, what those policies look like, what are things you need to be paying attention to as you're starting to roll out Copilot. But one of the things that I want you to take away from this talk is that you've already got the tools to do this. You maybe just not have stepped into this room yet. You maybe not be thinking about it. How many folks are already rolled out Copilot in their orgs? Yep. Okay. How many of you have just like, oh man, now I need to go do some Purview and some document management? Yeah. So that's what we're going to get into is what are the pieces you need to take a look at. So there's a lot of stuff on this slide, but the biggest piece of this is really these four cubes on the left-hand side. So the first is your data secure in rest at transit. So everything that you do in your tenant is and always will be secure. Anytime that we're transmitting data within the tenant or we're doing things with that data, it is secured in transit. You control your data. Okay. So what that means is that we're not looking at your data. We don't have the ability to even look at your data. I can't see things in your tenant even if I wanted to. And it's built that way on purpose. Your data is not used to train or enrich foundational models. That's very important. When you look at some of the competitors that are out there, some of the things I'm going to show you today is how to prevent your data from getting into LLM models that you don't want it to be in. Okay. The reason that we have been very successful with Copilot is that we do not train based off of what you do in Copilot. So your prompts that you build and your content that you build in Copilot, the things that you do with your data, that's your data. We don't do any training off of that whatsoever. And so one of the things that we're also focused on is making sure that you have the controls necessary so that if you wanted to prevent that data from going outside of your tenant, we can do that, right? So it's an extension of some of the data loss prevention policies that have already been in place. Last but not least, there's some policies and things that we have. There's some commitments in place against AI security and copyright. So if you're using AI to generate content, you're using AI to generate images, we actually have legal teams behind that can help you. So if you generate something and it ends up being a copyright claim, we actually can come to battle with you and kind of help through that process. That's something that we do that's different than a lot of other folks. So a lot of this stuff is really just to help safeguard what you're doing, make it easier for you to really get into the fun pieces of this. So how do we do this? So first is it's Copilot plus Purview. Purview's in the mix to help us with a lot of these things. How many folks have already deployed Purview in some form or fashion? Okay, great. So this is going to be an extension of things that you already are aware of. So we do honor existing permissions. So what that means is if you have already permissioned a document, that permission carries through into Copilot. It does not change. Okay. So if you've already marked a document as highly confidential and you access it via Copilot, it's still highly confidential. We don't take away that marking because that's there. We support lifecycle policies and audit requirements. Okay. So if you need to do a lifecycle on the data, We can support anything that you do in Copilot can be wrapped around that with a policy to protect it. Data loss and insider risk. So we're going to talk about some policies around that, of how to prevent that. And some of that has to do with making sure that folks aren't leaking things outside of your organization that they shouldn't be. So if they're taking some of your documents and they're uploading them somewhere else, we can show you how to protect against that. Detect and investigation of non-compliant and unethical usage. So we know as people start to roll out Copilot, we've seen instances where sometimes you have bad figures within an organization, right? And they ask Copilot to do things that maybe be unethical. Like, hey, I need to complete this sale. Tell me how to circumvent the system. We can actually show you how to prevent that, right? We've got some things that we can do in that space. Accessing oversharing risk and applying recommended corrections, and then guided assistance to remain compliant. So the accessing oversharing, that's the biggest thing that I typically teach on and speak on, because a lot of what happens is everybody wants to turn up Copilot, and then they immediately go, oh crap, I have all these documents out there. Copilot can see all of them. Can people see things they're not supposed to see, right? How do I control that? How do I take a look at that? So the oversharing risk is very real, but I'm going to show you a couple of things that you can do to start to look at that and really kind of get the documents under control as you start to roll out. The goal of this is not to scare you. It's simply to tell you, as you start to roll out Copilot, many times what I do with customers is we start to talk about what are my high value sites? Where's my R&D at? Where's my HR policies at? Where are things that I don't want to share with other people? I want to make sure those are kind of locked down. And we start there and we look at some of the reports I'm going to show you to be able to do that. The goal is to be able to start rolling out Copilot to people without any fear, and to make sure that you've got the controls in place that let you do that. So let's talk about both of these playing together. So you've got Purview on the left. So this is our security, compliance, and governance across data and files. That's not new. Purview's been around a very long time, so this is not a new piece, but there are some new tricks. And then on the right-hand side, we have SharePoint Advanced Management. So SharePoint Advanced Management is it's site management and contents governance capabilities built into SharePoint. This is now included in your Copilot license. So this used to be a little over a year ago. This was an add-on, and we did some talking with other folks and talking with customers, and we're like, well, if people are going to do Copilot, then they need this. And so it's now included in that license. So as long as you have a single Copilot license, you have access to SAM. And all the reports I show you, you will have access to be able to go see. Okay, so this is what lets us look at the sites, start to make decisions on where we need to action. Because many times as we look at SharePoint, if you're a big organization or even a small organization, knowing where to start is the hardest part, right? Knowing there's so many sites, like where do I pay attention to first? I'm going to show you how to determine some of that today. Okay, so our problem summary here. So we build on the data that's already in M365. So basically this means we need to strengthen our oversharing, our data loss, and our insider risk. So the grounding data and interactions are, if they're not secured, then this could lead to these three things. So access to information beyond what the user needs for their role. So this could be something where maybe that user has access to something we didn't even think about it. Maybe I shared a site link to them, and then I didn't go back and revoke that later. Or maybe I gave it to them at the document library layer in SharePoint instead of giving them access to the file. So now their index, when they look at Copilot, they have access to all of that, right? It's important to keep in mind, Copilot doesn't get some super user access when you use it. It runs under the context of the user. So us as admins, we have to figure out how do we make sure that the user only has access to what they need, and therefore we can protect those documents. Middle thing here is unauthorized disclosure of confidential data, confidential information. So this happens even like unintentionally, right? Where they share something that they're not supposed to, or they don't think about, a link that we're sharing to the outside world to a guest account, and maybe we didn't put a timer on it to revoke that at a certain time period. So it could be things of like that. Or also, if we've got documents that are marked highly confidential, making sure those don't leave our organization. So we've got some ways that we can do that. Last piece of this is out-of-date or irrelevant responses. So this has to do with retention policies, and it really comes down to the more data that you have, then obviously the more data that Copilot has to reason over. And so we want to be careful about, like, if I've got 10, 20 years worth of data, do I need all of that? Or can I offload some of that to get it out of my index so I can make Copilot more efficient in terms of what we're accessing? Because normally when I'm accessing things in Copilot, I don't need things that are 5, 10 years old. I'm looking for data within usually the last 12 months or so, at least in my own experience. We're going to talk about some things around that, but how do we solve some of this? So there's a lot of stuff on this slide. I'm going to make these slides all available to you so you don't have to take pictures and things like that. I'm going to make it where you can get to these because I know there's a lot of content on here. But the top half of this is how do we remediate these overshares and how do we think about these things? And then the bottom half is what is the outcome of that? So the first piece of this on the top left is identifying our high-risk sites and content. I talked about that a little bit already of like, where are my HR data? Where's my R&D data? Applying interim Copilot protections. So we have the ability with Copilot that we can say, everything's out. Like it's a default, everything's off. And then I go add in the sites that I want. Some customers, because of size or maybe their legal teams, they start out that way and then we go figure that out. Fixing the access and permissions. So what this does is it gives us the ability at the bottom here, high-risk sites are identified, they're prioritized, and they're contained. Our exposure is reduced immediately, even before we go through the full cleanup of things. And then the foundation is set for durable guardrails. So as I was talking about earlier, it's getting your data to the state where it's ready for Copilot to start acting upon it, right? It's getting you ready for that. In the center column, we talk about setting up the guardrails for this. Okay, so one of the things that I preach is that Copilot becomes the catalyst for Purview deployments, right? People don't think about Purview until they go, oh, I want you to do Copilot. Oh, I should probably do Purview. So one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit is how to get those defaults up, how to get our guardrails in place, and then how to continue to optimize and enforce those. So they're enforced by default. They're not manually remediated. New content and sites are protected at creation. So what that means is I can go in and say any new site that's created has a default label on everything in that site, right? So I can set things around that. I can say any site that gets created within my organization has a default label on it. I can then write policies around those labels, right? And that's kind of how we think about this. We label documents and then we write policies around the labels that we provide. So I can put those both in place. So this means that I can scale Copilot without reintroducing risk. Because if I'm going to go through the effort to fix all these things, I certainly want to stop the bleeding, right? I want to stop new stuff from being created that's not labeled correctly. This is one way that we can think about that. The last column on here is around regulations. So identifying and addressing gaps against AI regulations, defining our regulatory requirements, and then improving our data hygiene. And so what this means is most of us are subject to some form of regulation that we have to adhere to. We have the ability now within Purview to take a look at those regulations and make sure they apply across all of our data that's in our tenant. So we can actually define those requirements, and then that makes that hygiene a little better. So that makes it where the regulatory gaps are identified and tracked, and Copilot usage is auditable, enforceable, and defensible. So if we have to go through that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about SharePoint Advanced Management. And this is the demo here is going to be all slides and click through. I'm going to talk through it just to kind of give you an idea of what's out here. So this slide, there's a lot on here. And this slide is going to be something I'll update and send this to you. I know the colors are a little weird on this, but it's really going through the sprawl, identifying what the sprawl is, looking at the oversharing, and then going through that lifecycle management. So that's kind of how we think about these. The basic setup, as we go left to right, you have a blue box on the left-hand side and a pink colored box on the right. The basic setup is just assessing our current content state. Where are we? What's our baseline? What does things look like that we need to, because then we can know what we need to go and address. So we need to control that content structure, and that could be things such as we're putting our labels into place, we're putting default labels on sites, we're starting to train our users about what labels mean, because if they've never done things with labeling, you're now introducing a new thing to them of like, oh, well, I need to label these documents. There is a human piece to all of this, always will be. But thinking about how do you train your users on, hey, if you're dealing with a highly confidential document, mark it as so. We have this challenge inside Microsoft even, right? Well, we have constant training where we're teaching our staff and our employees, here's the types of things that need to be marked in certain cases. Now, yes, there are ways to automate that. Yes, there are queries that we can put in place that if I say the word confidential, it automatically marks it. Or if I'm talking about customer data, or I've got credit cards or social security numbers, I can automatically block things and put labels in place. But ultimately, you still got to train your users about what they need, what you need them to be doing. You're just going to put some automation in the back end as guardrails. And then we talk about the content lifecycle. So making sure that we've got some end dates on things. We're not keeping things out there forever. We're only keeping what we need. We talk about content oversharing and then content access. So all of these all come into play. And Sam helps you to take a look at all these pieces in here. So the first piece of this, assessing our content state. Okay, so what you're seeing in the screenshot on the right-hand side, we're inside the SharePoint Admin Center, and you will see an Advanced Management tab down here at the bottom. So right here, this is how we get into SAM. And then that's going to give you this main page here and lets you kind of look at everything that we need to look at. Okay, so the first is, this is all built in. Licenses included with Copilot. That's very important. You don't have to pay anything extra for this. You already have it if you have a Copilot license. We look across our tenant-wide insights. So we're looking across everything inside the tenant, all of your SharePoint sites, however many that may be, and we're giving you actionable solutions. So it's one thing to just say, hey, these sites are out of compliance or these sites have some risks, but it's also one of those where in this context, we tell you what you need to go do. Like, hey, these are the things that you need to action upon to solve this, to get it to a completed state. This also reduces that manual assessment and needing expert involvement. And then it defines that readiness for Copilot. Okay, so all of this is there right now. You have this today. You can log in literally to your tenant, take a look at this immediately. So as we go through this, the first piece of this is we're going to run this start assessment. Okay, so when you first come in here, this is exactly what it's going to look like in your tenant. These are going to have zeros on them because it hasn't been run yet. And you're going to go through and run this assessment. So you literally just click on this button and it goes through, starts the process for you. Then what happens is we start to get some data. Okay, so this is the data down here. So this is after it's run. This usually takes, depending on the size of your site, it could be a day, it could be a couple of hours, it could be a couple of days. Just depends on how much you got in the mix, how many sites that are out there. So you've got sites that are in site lifecycle, and then you've got sites that are in oversharing. So what this is telling me down here is sites that have site inactivity. So these, if you've got stale sites that are out there that people haven't been using, I probably want to clean those up, right? It's data that's sitting at rest, it's not being actively utilized. And so I've got some recommendations down here. And each of these, you'll see these recommendations out to the right. These are what I click on to find out what that resolution is and walk through that. I also have missing site ownership down here. So if I have sites that are just rogue and they don't have an owner, I need to know that, right? Because I need somebody to be responsible for that site. So I can go look at those and try to identify who that owner is going to be. On the right-hand side, I've got broken permission inheritance, which it does happen. So this is the concept of I've got permission set at the top layer of the site. Maybe I've got a document library underneath that has a broken inheritance, so I'm not inheriting the security layer above it. Or maybe I've got a file that's down in a document library that has broken inheritance on it. So the goal of this is it's to get to the point where you've kind of got, you're controlling things at the highest layer that you can, least common denominator, and then you're putting those permissions in place for that. Org-wide site permissions, and then also organization of anyone sharing links. So what this bottom one is if you've ever gone in and tried to share a file and it says, hey, do you want to share this with your whole org? And you go, yeah, default option, good to go. That's what this is. Because eventually you want to clean those up, right? Eventually you want to get to, I don't want to share things to everybody. I've got some instances, like in our world, for example, on my team, we produced a lot of different documents that we share out to the world. So in that case, I have a legit reason for a share all link. But most people, I need to share this to a group of 100 or 20 or whatever that is. It's not an everyone. And so the everyone creates risk, right? Because it's everyone. So we do some things to help you kind of figure out what those look like. Okay, and you can restart this assessment anytime you want up here and rerun it, take a look at what's out there and start to work through these. This is typically when I work through with customers, this is where I start because this kind of tells you what are we working against, right? So I've only got, and these are not bad. These numbers are not, we got 39% we need to address here, 26% over here. This is a lot of sites, but it also, I now know where to go and I can start to put some things around this to work through it. So once I click on the inactivity down here, so I clicked on this view recommendations, and that's what gave me this pop out. And it tells me the things that I need to do over here on the right, right? So it's telling me what my recommended next steps are. And it's taking me down here at the bottom, I have a link that goes to my inactive site policy page. So literally in this one pane here, I can take a look at what are the things I need to do, right? Because it's one thing for me to tell you, hey, there's some challenges. It's the other is like, okay, what's next? So this what's next is built right into the product to give you an idea of what that looks like. Okay, so this is how we think about those pieces. Let's talk a little bit about controlling content structure. Okay, so this is our content distribution across regions, departments, and users. What this does is it uses built-in metadata. So this is content categories and groups for management. The concept here is being able to go in and put a category around my documents. Okay, so if I've got documents for my marketing team, for example, I can create a category for marketing, and I can start to apply that using this catalog, this control content structure that's in here. So this gives me the ability to put things into buckets, and I can identify the types of data, and then I can put policies around that, and I can act on those. Okay, so this is, again, it lets you get very, very granular. What you see in the screenshot is where we're looking at adding a category. And our next view here is the same thing. So I'm inside the catalog management here, and I'm organizing those sites into catalogs so that I know what they are. Okay, so I've got some examples down here where I've got user types, I've got departments, I've got locale, I've got my digital employees or digital workers, I've got cost centers down here. So what I'm trying to get to is if I can get my sites into a category, chances are good I've got a policy I want to apply to the category. That's the logic here, is to try to help you organize that and think about that in that way. This also makes it where you may have multiple different departments around this. You may have your marketing department, you may have stuff in sales, but they may have similar categories. And so I can say, I want a policy over the category. That's the logic here, is giving you some way to do this. You will see some that are auto-generated. So some of these are in here are auto-generated by system, but you can add in whatever you want inside here. So if I click on add category, what I'm going to get is this pop out on the right. And so I can upload URLs for the group. So if I want to add a bunch of sites into there, very easily do that via file. I can add in keywords. I can add in our properties down here, or enter ID extension attributes. So we've got a lot of different ways to get things into those categories. And again, this is not something it's not required, but what we're trying to do is make it easier. Like, we're trying to give you the tools to wrap your head around, like, how do I start to organize my data in SharePoint so that I can start to put some controls in place for it. And once I do that upload, I define my category name. This description is for you and your admins. I always tell people, please put something in here. Like, think about what you would want to see if you came in here and it not just be blank. I tell people this for every policy that I ever write. Like, don't just leave this blank, or like, this is Bryan's policy. That doesn't help anybody, but what this is supposed to be. And then I've got my CSV files down here with the URLs. So I've got 194 sites that are CVP here, and I've got 129 sites that are EVP. And that gives me an idea of what these categories are. Okay. So once I get that done, I've now got an LT content down here at the bottom, and I've defined the number of the sites that are in that content list. And now I can start to apply things to that. So I can start to do things to those sites at a broad layer, right? Instead of having to go through and say, I want to apply this policy to this specific site, I can now address the category. That's the logic behind this, is to make that a little bit easier. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the right-hand side of this. Okay, so the right-hand side is this content control pieces and our lifecycle that's in here. Okay, so for our content lifecycle, this is retention policies is what this is. And so what this is thinking about what is the scope of our data. And as I said earlier, the older the data that's out there, we're still going to index it. Copilot can still see everything that you have active in your tenant. And so one of the things that we encourage is maybe you don't need everything. Maybe things can go to cold storage. Maybe they don't need to be fully active. The more that you have in the tenant, the more that Copilot has to reason over, the longer Copilot takes to index, the longer the queries take. Like, all those things come into play. Data is data. There's no way around that. And so what this is asking you to start thinking about is, what policies do you need to put in place, right? So this can be, it can be SharePoint data, Outlook data, Teams data. All those things are all in play for lifecycle management. And this is not new to Copilot. What is new is that Copilot is directly impacted by the amount of data it has to reason over. That should logically make sense. And so this has become something that's important to at least pay attention to. Okay, so what does this look like? We are in the admin center again. I'm under policies and site lifecycle management. And so I'm looking at a couple things across here. So I can open up each of these areas and think through these. But I'm looking at my inactive sites. So again, if I've got sites, and we show on the other slide, we had thousands of inactive sites. Okay, great. So how do I get those out of the mix? Like, if we're not using them, nobody's accessing that data. I don't need that live. I don't need it near, right? So this inactive site policy does a couple things for us. First, it's going to help you to identify the sites that are not being used, right? One shot. I don't have to go talk to a million people to figure this out. But secondly, if I've got owners and admins identified for those sites, I can send them a message and say, hey, this has been identified as inactive. Are you really using this? Does it need to come back to near field, or is it something that we can archive, right? We put it in archive state, and we can archive and mark those sites in a read-only state. So if they're really not using it, it's just there for read-only, great. Let's put it in read-only. Let's stop generating new content in that site. We can do that. Okay, so you'll see inside here. So this is that first page. So I click on open inside here, and I'm going to set my policy scope. So I can upload a list of up to 10,000 URLs. These are my site URLs that I want to run against. And then what happens is I can do a filter by the label. I can do a filter by the content category, which is what we talked about earlier. So this is my catalog. So in this case, I say, I only want to look at things that are in the finance department, and I only want to look at things that are labeled as top secret. Okay, so those are the things that I care about. And then once I run this, now I've got a pane that gives me that email. So this is where I can check my site owners or my site admins. And then I can say, how many emails do I want to send them? You can spam the crap out of them and just like keep sending them email until they respond. We do that internally. We get emails like every 90 days of sites. And so you can say, all right, well, how long is the read-only period? And then here's my email message, which you can customize. You can put whatever you want to in here. And then what are the things that they need to do? Now, the cool thing that happens, once I send this, I click on, you're always going to have a simulation mode. I recommend use simulation first, especially before you start sending this out to thousands of people. Try it. Make sure you get what you expect. And then you've got an active state to actually execute against that. So once we send this, this is what your owners and admins get. They get this really cool email. And it says, hey, you've got some inactive sites. Here's the number that are out there that are pending. Here's that have been set to read only. And here's the ones that are archived. And so they can click on this button and this carries them into this interface, right? So they're now in SharePoint. They don't need you. They can do this work for themselves. So they can come into this email and say, oh yeah, I don't need this Costco finance site anymore, right? I can mark this as I don't need it and it can go to archive. Or in this case, they've already done it. So they've already reviewed it. And so what this does is it gives you a one-stop shop where you're not having a bunch of back and forth of emails. Like, I don't want to do the work for 1,000 sites. I want my admins to come in here and tell me, yes, I don't need this. Yes, it can be read-only. Yes, it can be archived. This is a really cool way that they can do this. And you can see these site reviews yourself as an admin and take a look at where they are in the process. And again, like I said, you spam the crap out of them, send them emails. And also it ends up being where the emails become escalation, right? Because like by the third one, I'm like, you got 30 days. I'm turning your stuff off, right? But that's how we do it. Okay. So let's talk about content oversharing a little bit. So inside this, the comprehensive permission report, really hard to say fast, for our entire tenant supports up to 1 million sites. Okay, so that's a lot of sites that are out there. What this is looking for is we're looking at detecting those root causes of oversharing. Okay, so we're looking at broken inheritance, which we talked about. We talked about sharing links that are out there that maybe we haven't contained, EEUs, and site privacy and a couple of other things. Okay, so this is, again, we're looking at this at the content overshare standpoint, and we're looking at those the sensitivity and pieces that are there. And there's some reports that we can look at here. So I'm going to show you kind of what these look like. Common causes for Copilot oversharing. Again, this is not to scare you. This is just what we see. The top left corner of this is setting our privacy to public. Okay, so what this means is if I set my site to public, anybody in my org can access that site. If they can access the site, Copilot can reason over the data in that site. Make sense? They have access to it. They can see it. They can touch it. Public, anyone in the organization can access. And the second piece, these go down a little bit of a layer in these. So you've got the public and you've got private. Most of your sites are going to be set to private. They should be. You have a contained set of people that need access to the data that's in that site. There are exceptions. In the Microsoft world, like for example, our HR sites are set to public, right? Because we have HR documents we need to get to all of our organization. Those are public. My team sites, that is only my team, those are private. Groups of people that I'm working with on a project, those are private. Everybody in my company doesn't need access to that, okay? So that's one thing that we see, and that's one of the reports that we can look at. The second is my default sharing option set to everyone, okay? So what this means is I have the ability to control what that share link looks like inside SharePoint and inside OneDrive. So if you haven't changed this, chances are good it's still on everyone. What that means is when I click on copy link, the default permission is everybody in my organization has access to this file, okay? That can create chaos because it means if somebody's sharing things unknowingly, hey, I want to share this file with Connie, and I share it to Connie with everyone's access, and now everybody in the organization has access to that file if they have access to that link, okay? So setting this down to where it's only the people that are in the site or only the people in my team, or at least making it where the user has to think before they click the button. Because there's a prompt if we turn this off and it says, do you really want to share this to everybody? And I know Microsoft is infamous for like, are you really, really, really sure? Like, this is that box though. This is the, okay, yes, I really want to share this to everybody. I have a reason, okay? So this is another big important, and we can look at how much of this is out there and how do I rein this back in? We can take a look at that data. Broken permission inheritance, I talked about a little bit. So this happens when I move a file. It typically happens when I move a file between SharePoint sites. And so I've got the correct permissions for my team over here, and I need to move that file to somewhere else or copy it to another site, and it tries to retain those permissions, and I want it to inherit what's the new permission. So that's where you get into broken permission inheritance. You can break inheritance on your own, and what that means is, like, if I'm going to share a file specifically to one person, I'm going to have to break inheritance to do that. What you should be thinking about is, does the person I'm sharing this to have access to the document library of the site? I'm controlling that at the group layer higher versus at the individual layer lower. The use of everyone except external users, domain group. This is very similar to this. So this is saying that when I share things, I'm sharing the site to everyone but external, and then everyone except external in our domain group. So these are kind of the same things. And it's, again, this is not to scare you. That's not my job. What I want you to be aware of is what's out there, and these are things that we can go and correct very quickly. So you may have some of this already in your organization. That's okay. But how do we determine which ones I actually need this setting for and which ones I can turn it off for? So how do we look at this? Okay, so I'm down. I'm in my SharePoint Admin Center again. I'm down under my reports, and I'm around data access governance. Okay, so I've got a couple reports in here. So this is my site permissions. This is my site permissions for users. And this is my sensitivity over here. So all three of these are kind of together in this. When I click on the snapshot report, what I'm going to get is these are all the sites. This is a lot of data. This is overwhelming the first time you come in here. It was for me, promise, but it gets better. So what this is telling me as I look across here is, this is my HR site. These are the number of users that are permissioned. So I've got 22,300 some change. I got 40,000 some odd files in here. 5,000 of those are sensitive. A couple of those have unique permissions, meaning they're not rolling up to the default. I've got some people in org links. So this means that I have found links within this site that people have shared to the org, right? This is an HR site. So maybe I need that, maybe I don't, but I at least know what's out there. I've got my anyone links that are out here. So anyone in my org can see that. I've got my site policies, and then I look at my sensitivity labels in there. So this is looking at all the sites that you have access to, all the sites that are in your tenant. And this lets you look at, where do I need to start paying attention? Where are the things that I need to start looking at? This slide kind of breaks that down. This is a little zoomed in, but it's the same concept I was just talking about. So the files that have sensitive data in them. So this is based off of your regular expressions. This could be credit card data, social security number, account name, or whatever you define. Broken inheritance, the use of everyone, the default sharing option, and the site privacy set to public. So this is kind of my first one. This is where I usually start, because if I've got things that are set to public, that means my whole org has access to them. So that's when I start through this. When I do this, this is the first column I look at, because I'm like, okay, is it public? Does it need to be? And if it's not, okay, let's flip it over to private real quick. It's an easy solve. These are going to be conversations typically around, you can go fix all these. Sometimes you're involved with your site owners or your site admins to kind of figure out what you need to do next. And then the next piece of this, so this is the permission. This is the next permission report over. This is permissions to too many users. So again, looking at Contoso Finance, SharePoint site, here's the scope. 7,000 people is in the mix. I've got passport numbers that have been identified in there. Sensitivity level is top secret. I got 4 groups that are in play. This is the number of groups that have permission to the site. And then I can look across this and I can see what that access is. So I can do all of these things without having to go into these individual sites one by one. I get a report that kind of, again, I talked about earlier, where do you start? This is to give you an idea of where to start, right? To give you an idea of what are things that you need to be paying attention to. Okay, so we look at the site permissions for users. Again, this is at the user level. So I'm putting in my user. You can do this at a filtered level. So in this case, we've only got 6 users in this tenant, but I'm looking at Brenda. What does Brenda have access to? What does Brenda have shared? What are the things that Brenda can see? Like, that's what this is giving me. So it's showing me whether they have indirect through group management or direct. I've given them direct access to these documents and sites. Okay. So again, as you're looking at auditing, the way this report works is, this is typically like my CVPs. To start with, these are my executives. These are my people that are in roles that I know are going to have access to data that's going to be more sensitive. I'm going to go look at this. I'm going to make sure that they have access to these things. And then it could be the reverse. If you've got frontline workers that you know don't need access to a ton of things, then maybe you look up them and figure out what they have access to as well. So that's the way this user access report works. It gives you a snapshot of, what does that user see? What can they do? So then again, this is just zoomed in. So the number of sites that she has access to, what items she has direct access to, what items she has indirect access to. So this tells me that she has been directly added to those files or document libraries, and this means that she has group managed access to that. That's what those are telling me. And again, you're looking at your site sensitivity. So one of the things that you're going to have to go through is, as I said earlier, identifying what sites are of what sensitivity level. Like, so I'm identifying, or I'm working with my security team to identify what are my top secret sites? What are my highly confidential sites? What are the things I need to be aware of as I go through this? All right. Talk a little bit about restricted content discovery and also delegation. Okay, so what this is in a nutshell is the ability to limit via site what Copilot can see. Okay, so let me kind of explain that a little bit. What this means is I can go in and I can say, Copilot can't see anything. I can big master switch off, right? Big primary switch off. And then I can go in and add in sites that I've gone through and done my due diligence on and say, okay, Copilot can see nothing. And then I've gone through, I've used my reports. I've found sites that make sense. I've got my company sites that have all my data. I've done the due diligence of labeling. I've got all that done. I want to put that site in the mix. This is how we do that. So you have this one switch that you can turn off, and then you can go back in and start to add in sites that you have done your due diligence on. I've seen a lot of customers use this. And the biggest thing that I'll tell you is this is not the easy button. You still have to go do the work to get your sites into the mix. But this lets you say, hey, I want to enable a whole bunch of people for Copilot, but I haven't had time to go through and label everything yet. I know that's going to take me a couple of months, maybe a couple of quarters to get through, but I still want them to be able to use this, okay? So I want them to have access to their OneDrive data, their Outlook data, their Teams data, all the stuff that they store, but maybe I'm not ready for them to have access to all the SharePoint stuff yet, right? Because I want to go do my due diligence. This is how we do that. Okay, so we can turn everything off and then start to add sites back in. So this is the site that kind of looks through that and what it does. So on the right-hand side here, we're just adding in the sites that we want people to have access to, and it's at the site level. Okay, so even if we have broken inheritance, restricted access control, or RAC, because Microsoft loves acronyms. So RAC is basically, we honor that RAC policy. So once we put that policy in place at the site level, it is honored no matter what. So even if there's files that are inside that have broken inheritance, that site is not accessible, right? Copilot can't crawl that. It's not in the index. So that's how that works. What I see for this for folks is, again, this is typically a jumping off point. Like if I'm working with customers that go, this is overwhelming, Bryan. I don't know how to, it's going to take me a while to do this. Great. Let's put this in place. Start to figure out your key sites that people have data that they're going to use in Copilot. Add those sites in so they can get access to that immediately. Go through your processes of labeling things and then keep adding those sites into the mix until you get to the point where you're good. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Purview now. Okay, so we talked about SAM. We'll change gears a little bit and talk about where Purview comes into the mix for this. Okay, so the first of this, there's two slides here. So the first one here is just putting our guardrails into place and then talking about our ongoing remediations. Okay, so the left-hand side of this is I have auditability of all Copilot interactions. How many of you knew that? Purview sees all of your Copilot interactions. Like I can go in there and look at those. I can see what my users are doing. I can see what they're querying. I can limit what they're querying. All of those are there, okay? So I can prevent data loss and oversharing of sensitive data. So I can go in here and I can say, if I've got a highly confidential document, I don't want them to be able to access that. I don't want Copilot to reason over highly confidential stuff. I can exclude that, okay? And I can put my secure grounding in for my responses. So I can actually make sure that things that I want to do are grounded. Right-hand side over here is addressing our gaps against regulation. Talked about regulation a little bit earlier, but how do I make sure that we're not breaking regulation, or how do we maintaining compliance with regulation? And then how do I remediate some of this oversharing and reduce my data exposure? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about those. The second slide is kind of the how. Like we talked on this slide, here's the things we're trying to solve. Here's the how do we solve those in this next slide. So the first is we turn on auditing. So I can see everything. If you don't have auditing turned on, you're not going to see all the data. So you got to turn auditing on if you haven't done so already. We're going to use DLP policies. Those are not new. They just now have Copilot in the mix. We're going to put our sensitivity labels in place at provisioning, meaning that when a person provisions a site, they have to pick a sensitivity label. They have to determine what's the sensitivity label of the site, which then my policies can run to. Our compliance manager for AI, running data risk assessment reports, and then data lifecycle management policies in the bottom. Okay, so these are how we're going to address some of these. Let's talk about secure defaults from day one. Okay, so this again, giving you some guidance on what are the things you need to be thinking about. So the first of this is, how many of you have heard of Copilot Control System? Okay, so this is a new name for like a collection of things that we do across Copilot. So I'm in my admin center up here, and then I've got access to all this in Copilot Control System. I see security tab here, and this is Purview. So what I'm looking at is, I'm in monitor state right here. So I can see that by the box. And I can look at what these policies are. So what am I preventing from being leaked? And what are my default protections that are in place here? So as I go into these, clicking on Manage Policy, and now I've got my interactions over here. So what does this mean? This is the ability for me to put a policy in place that says, if a user is accessing a, pick your label, highly confidential document, I don't want that in Copilot. I can do that at the label layer. I can say a highly confidential document, if it is marked that way, or if it's coming from that site, Copilot cannot reason over that. Copilot is out of the mix. So I can put those into place. Why? Well, again, if I'm talking about like an R&D site, maybe I don't want Copilot to have access to R&D. Maybe I do. It's a decision you have to make, but you have the ability to make that decision. You have the ability to put policies in place around that. So I'll put this policy in place for data leakage. I clicked on my users down here. So that's where this little guy is. And then I'm applying it to specific people or to the entire tenant. So maybe I've got folks that are in a highly sensitive job title or job role, and I want to make sure that they are not sharing this data where it doesn't need to go. Okay, so I'm putting these documents. This is no different than when you think about labeling for emails, like preventing people from sending confidential data outside of your organization in the email. This is the same thing, but it's just Copilot. It's the exact same process, it's the exact same policies, but now Copilot's in the mix. Okay, so I go on my users, and then now what happens is when the user, this is the user's view. So when they try to access this, it's restricted due to policy. So they're unable to access that document. They're unable to summarize its contents. So what this prevents is the age-old. So the example that I used to give a year ago was there actually was an instance where someone had all of their executive salaries in a Excel file, and it was sitting out, on a document library in a random place. Permissions weren't set correctly. All their users had access to it. They just didn't know, right? And then I go ask Copilot, hey, what does my boss make? And Copilot goes, I got the answer to that. I have access to the spreadsheet. And then it returned the answer, and they go, oh God, like this is not data we want to have. So now I can go protect that spreadsheet and say it's confidential data, and I want confidential data to not be returned to this user or this group of users. And this is the result that they would now get. So I can go in and I can mark and protect my sensitive sites and content. This is what they would see though. Okay. So as we go into this, the other is how do we safeguard this? So on the right-hand side, there's a couple things you can do here. So you can say different content types, sensitivity info types. You can also define the terms that are in here. Again, same logic that you've used in Purview for every other facet of M365, but Copilot's just now in the mix. So we can actually just turn this on in the Copilot space. Down here at the bottom, so I can restrict the user prompts from being processed. Okay. This is the checkbox for Copilot in this list, because this basically is saying, if these are all true, then don't let Copilot do anything with this and return back that dialogue to the user to say, this is sensitive data. You can't access it in Copilot. And it may be that they can get to it other means, right? So maybe you're saying, you can open this up in Excel and edit it. I just don't want you to reason over it with Copilot. That's what this is saying. That's the logic here. Okay, so this is, again, organizations block Copilot. So this is the type of thing that they'll see. And they'll say, like in this case, we have a project called Wingtip out here, and we've marked that site with a policy. And the person's like, hey, I heard about this, this rumbling of a rumor about this project. Let me go see what Copilot can go get me on it. And we do this now, right? We're learning to use prompts in Copilot. I ask Copilot for everything. But so I just go summarize this, and it says, nope, you can't do that. Good try, but you don't have access to that data. And then this is if they do have access to it, they can rephrase it. Like in this case, they're saying, give me the details of the acquisition of Wingtip, which is called Project Falcon. And it's like, you can't use search because it's restricted, but here's kind of the data that you have access to. I can give you like high level overview of things, but I can't give you the actual data. So you can kind of control this now with the DLP prompts that are out there. So this is SharePoint sensitivity labels here. So in this case, I am over in DSPM. I'm inside Purview, and then DSPM here, and then data risk assessments. So this is letting me look at the data risk assessments for my sites. And this Mark 8 project team, I've got my source type as in standard SharePoint. I don't have any sensitivity label applied, which should probably be a flag. And then what I'm doing is I'm going in and applying that sensitivity label to that site. So there's a couple things that are all in play here, right? So I'm creating my sensitivity labels. I'm defining what those are. There's some defaults. You can make up whatever name makes you happy. I don't care. And then you are applying those at file level or site level. So if you know there are sites that are sensitive, like this project, then I can come in here and say, I want to apply that sensitivity label. I am then writing a policy with that label in play to do what I want to with the data in that site or with that label. So I have seen customers where they may create a label just for this project. Like this is just the Mark 8 project sensitivity label. And everything's going to get that. And then anything that has Mark 8 label in it or has a meets the query, it's out, right? We can't do queries on it. We can do things to it. You can control. There's a lot of granularity in here. What I tell people is don't try to boil the ocean to start with, because you can. Think about what are the things that are important to your company. Put those labels in place first. All right. Let's talk a little bit about how do we remediate oversharing. So now that I've scared the crap out of you with how oversharing works, let me show you how to fix some of that. So we're back in CCS. And inside here, we're going to scroll down and we're going to go into manage data oversharing inside here. Okay. We're going to click on our improve permissions. And that's going to take us into here. So then we're getting some guidance on what do we need to do? What are the things that we can do in this space? And I'm creating sensitivity labels. And everything that I'm telling you, this is exactly what's in the dialogues here. Create the label. I'm going to create the policy around the label. And then I'm going to work with my admins to restrict sites. And I'm going to go through. And the other thing about this is that once you do it, or one of your admins, they can mark it as completed. So you can come back in here and say, oh yeah, I assigned this out to somebody. That's been done. It's just it's a attestation, right? That's been completed for you. So what does this give us? Again, we're in DSPM. We're taking a look inside our main page here, and I can see my agents that are in here. I can see what labeled assets are in play, what are covered by those policies. And then I go down here and I click on objectives on the left. And then that's going to take me into here. So this is saying I want to prevent data exposure in Copilot and interactions, and I want to prevent oversharing of sensitive data. Okay, so both of those things that are things that I want to do. And these are the remediation plans, right? So here's my number of interactions with Copilot. Here's my number of items that are at risk. And I want to probably go through review remediation for both of these. So I'll go through to new objective down here at the bottom. Again, this is all slide work because I don't trust the internet for demos. Otherwise, I would do this live. So we're going to view objective down here at prevent oversharing. And now I can see what are the items that have been scanned, what are the unlabeled items within my tenant, and what are the overshared items in my tenant. And then I can start to look through these remediation plans. So again, not only are we helping you to identify, but we're telling you what the next steps look like, right? So I go into view remediation, and there's the things I'm going to get. Here's the steps I need to go through. Okay, so I need to protect my data from oversharing risk. What are the details of that? I want to protect it from oversharing risk in Fabric. What are the details of that? What are the steps? So again, not just telling you where your risk level is at, but how do I remediate that? So in this case, I'm going to look at my default assessment results for oversharing. And then this is going to tell me what's out there. Okay, so I've scanned across all of my data, and I'm looking at there's 64 sources in the mix. I've got 136 overshared files. I've got stuff that's been scanned and stuff that's not been scanned, but this is giving me an overview of everything that's out there that I've asked it to look at. So in this case, we're focused on this merger assessment. So when we ran this, it means that we defined these sites are the ones I want to look at. These are the people I want to look at. We can scope down to that. So again, you can literally boil the ocean with this if you just point at your tenant. But it becomes what am I concerned with? What have I identified that's I want to look at and assess, and then working through that. So I'm going to click on View Items, and then that's going to give me all of these items that I need to look at and decide what I'm going to do with. And I'm going to understand what the labels are. I understand who the owners are, and understand my tags of what I'm working on, and then what are the link types. So in this case, these are tagged because the sharing link type is anyone. It means that somebody erroneously or without malicious intent, they set this as an anyone sharing link. And so I want to go correct that. So I'm going to either remove this link, or I'm going to change the sharing link type in these. So I click on, in this case, this is a password document. Click on that, click on resolve. And then this is going to tell me, here's what we're going to do to resolve it. And so it's going to do all this for you within the admin console. So once that gets done, resolve, And then I can also remove that sharing link, or maybe I want to apply a sensitivity label to that. So these are the things I can do down here. Okay, so I click on apply sensitivity. I pick my label. Yep. Which one I want. And apply. And then all that's done. So what I want you to take away from that is that I don't have to go into every site. We can't possibly go into every site. Let's just be honest with each other. I can't look at every file. But from that admin console, I can very easily find out what things are high risk. And I can very easily find out things that I can take action on. And I don't have to go into all of those things. I don't have to go out to SharePoint, log into the site, talk to the admin. I can fix it right there. And that's what we wanted you to get out of that console, is being able to do that. All right, let's talk a little bit about regulations. Okay, so we have all kinds of AI laws that are out there now, expanding across 50 different countries and regions. How do we maintain compliance with all of these? And so one of the things with this and that we've started to put into place is all this is now built in. So we can actually import what those policies look like and then how we're going to look at those. Okay, so I'm back inside. I'm in my main admin center here, and then I'm in my managed data oversharing where we were before. Okay, so I'm inside both of these. And I'm down here at strength and data compliance. I'm going to click on view my details for compliance or Copilot interactions. And then inside here, I see what actions have been completed by Microsoft for me. And then what are the remediation steps I need to look at. So then I'm going to click on, as I get into that compliance manager, this is actually going to show you. But what this is as the regulatory templates come out from the organizations that are regulating us, whatever that may be, we have the ability to import that template. And so if any of you have ever read a regulatory document, I'm an IT guy. I'm not in the legal world. I could care less, right? I'm not going to understand it, but I have to, right? That's just the way the world is. And so what this does is it now lets me take that regulatory document, feed it into AI, and let AI try to determine what are the things that I need to apply to become compliant. So it's looking at the language in the documents and then giving me the steps that I need to put into place. So it takes those overwhelming regulations and put those into actionable priorities. Okay, and this goes across Foundry and other services to get compliance posture. So let's look at this. So inside here, I am in Compliance Manager. I'm inside Purview. Compliance Manager at the bottom, regulations. So I'm inside this regulations. I can see all the regulations that I have access to that are templated. And then I'm going to add in a new template. So I'm going to click up here, create new template. And that's going to give me a pop-up box. I'm going to upload a PDF. This is the cool part, because I can go get that regulation, whatever it is, whatever format, upload that to the tenant. I just print it out as a PDF. Great. Put everything in here. And then once I get that uploaded, I tell it what I'm going to name it. I tell it what the regulation is going to be, what services am I protecting. And then I'm going to click on the scan and extract down here at the bottom. And what that's going to do is it's going to process all of that for me. And it's going to tell me, here's all the chapters that are in that regulation. And here's all the different controls that are out there. And then as I move through, I now see, here's a control, here's the article, here's the achievable points that I need to get to. Because again, everything's gamification, right? We're trying to get to 100 points on everything. But here's the control family, chapter 3, high risk AI. Here's the requirements. Here's the improvement actions I need to take to become compliant with that regulation. Now, again, I didn't read the regulation. I'm not going to sit down and do that unless I need help falling asleep at night. But I've got that in my tenant now, and AI has processed that for me to tell me what are the things I need to be thinking about. So these are the steps that I would provide. And then once I get done, I now have all of those things into this view where I can come down here and say, review my unused files, but I've processed all of that regulation. So then if I get audited, I now have that as a paper trail to say, this is what I did to be compliant. This is what we identified in the tenant to maintain the compliance for your regulation. So I can show I actively took steps to become compliant with your regulation. I went through those processes. But again, in the past, this would be a team of people sitting down and going, all right, how does this apply? What do we need to do? Who's involved? How many people need to be at the table? How many stakeholders do I have to have? I can now take that report back to my management team and say, here's what was identified. How do we want to action on this? And then I can apply those actions. Here's what we identified from AI. Is it going to be perfect? No, AI is not perfect, never will be, but at least gives me a great starting point to have those conversations. And I'm not coming in like, I don't know, I didn't read it, right? So you've got some things in there. Unused files list down here at the bottom. Okay, so this is, again, looking at data that's out there that we haven't touched in a long time. And this is where I apply those policies to. So I've got my Copilot Experiences app. This is in Preview, which you should all have this. So I'm applying the policy to that. And then we get into the oversharing piece. This is probably the most important QR code that you could take a picture of. So this is a full-blown deployment guide of all the things that I'm talking about. Framework, architecture, all the stuff that I've covered. This is our blueprint. And the URL is down here at the bottom. It's aka.ms/copilot/secure-govern. But this takes you through all of the steps and the guardrails and things that I've covered in this session and gives you an idea of what are the things that you need to know, what are the steps you need to go through. So we talked a lot about remediating oversharing, identifying our high-risk sites. We talked about how to put our protections in place, how to protect our permissions. We talked about guardrails and our default secure defaults, and then working forward with those. And then we also rounded it up with talking through regulations and the things that we can do. And that concludes, I think I have 4 minutes left. So I'm happy to take questions. And I genuinely hope that this was beneficial to kind of take the scary out of this, because the controls are here. You just have to know where to start and where to get through those pieces. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yep. So as default Microsoft nomenclature, I am not a license specialist because we have those because our licenses are complicated as crap. But an E3 basically affords you all of this. You will not have automation around your regular expressions. So there's not automatic application of the sensitivity label. You would have to do it. With an E5, you have the ability to go in and say, if it meets this expression, social security number, automatically apply. You would have to do that or set up those labels in that case. That's the big, everything else I showed you can do. Yeah, there's no, because that's the biggest thing was the SAM license. And now that SAM's in Copilot, all of that's all there. So all the reporting I showed you is all available. All the things I showed you in Purview are all available. The difference is manual versus automation. And automation is in E5. Yep, great question though. Yes, sir. Yep. Yep. So the question is around sites that need to be exposed, or how to think about being exposed or not being exposed. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So it depends on what your content policy looks like for your company. So the way I think about this is, if I have a set of sites that haven't been touched in, say, 3 months, chances are good those need to go to read only at least. And then maybe I've got 6 months and see if they're touched again. And if they're not, then I put them into archive. Right. And again, the goal is I'm trying to get things out of my index, because my index is what lets Copilot work. The more stuff that's in index, the harder Copilot has to churn to get me answers to things, the more it has to process through. And so the whole goal of that is to say, if I've got data that hasn't been touched, maybe I don't need it. Maybe you do. Maybe there's stuff out there. There's a policy that you need around for 5 years. Great. But at least I've seen it. I've looked at it. Yes, I need that. Whereas there's other sites where, so in the Microsoft world, we roll on I think we roll on 90 days right now. So every 90 days, I have to attest that I'm using a site. And the same thing, because if I'm not using it, it's not been active, then they want to take it out of the index because it speeds up everything else in terms of Copilot. And also, you're not getting legacy responses into your prompts. So like when you're asking for things, it's near versus I don't need a 5-year-old answer. Maybe I do, right? But most of the time, I need something with, like I said, within the last year, is what I'm looking for. So that's the logic. Put things into read only that need to be, archive things that need to be. But the more that you take out of the tenant space, the smaller the index gets, and the more efficient the index is, and the more relevant your prompt responses will be. Yep. 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 The cost is, yeah. Because when you're going to cold storage or offline storage, it's much cheaper than having active in the temp. Yep. Into the licenses. Yep. 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 So you can still call it. It's just not in the index. Yep. Yep. And we see a lot of that with folks that go through this process. Again, it's to get stuff. If I don't need it active, then let me pay for the cheaper storage to have it, near or cold versus having it just right in the index. All right, we're at time. I'm happy to hang around. Last thing I'll ask of you is please go do an eval. This is how I determine that this went well, and how do we tweak these, and how do I bring more Microsoft staff to these events for you? So as you go through and do your evals for the week, please go through all those processes. I will make the slides. So it's probably going to be next week when I get home, but I'll make them available to you so you can see them, so that you guys can have access to all this. Pretty much everything that I covered is in that blueprint in some form or fashion, in some code. Okay. Cool. Awesome, folks. Thank you so much for attending.